Welcome to the Wandering Métis. Today we meet Don Wilkins, a master craftsman dedicated to preserving our shared heritage through his vivid tales and traditional craft. Join us as we explore his inspiring story and learn more about his journey to keep our history visible along the Louis Riel Trail.
I'd like to thank you for welcoming me to Davidson, to your home, and I look forward to having a chat today about your sculptures along the Louis Riel Trail.
I've always been interested in history from the time I was a child. My father, and they called them pioneers, weren't really the first people in Saskatchewan. There have been people here for thousands of years, and they made their home and living here. And I've never forgotten that. The story of our native peoples, Métis and First Nations people, really interests me. As my dad started breaking up because he was homesteading, he once in a while would come home with a hammer or a piece of native artifact. That I took a real interest in. So I never let it go.
We are proud of the sculptures that you've made on our behalf. So being a non-Indigenous person, can you share with me what drove you to make Métis sculptures?
I think I was looking for a very important story about our history in Saskatchewan. People were driving from Saskatoon and Regina and back again and said it's a long, boring drive. Maybe we should do something about that. If they think it's an uninteresting journey, maybe we should tell them and show them what it's really like. And so they agreed, and I said, why don't we name the highway? And before they said anything else, I jumped in it with a name. I said, how about Louis Riel Trail?
Along the trail, how receptive were the towns to having our Métis sculptures there?
Well, we did have to get permission to set them up. There was a criteria that was involved. For one thing, they had to be accessible, visible, and safe. We started in Duck Lake and then worked down the highway towards Regina. I've donated my work. If I can tell somebody, I'll put up a piece in your town and not add to your tax bill, well, at least I've got their attention.
So can you share with me your transition from farming to sculpting?
Well, I didn't know whether I could put sculptures together. For one thing, it was an experiment. And I thought, well, I did enjoy welding. I built, I fixed machinery, and I built a couple of machines. And so I enjoyed welding. But I also enjoyed history. The first piece I did was a bison, just an animal, a bison, and it's set up in Girvan. I drew a schematic on the floor in here. Nobody taught me anything, and I don't claim any perfection. It's just, I feel good doing it.
So we've picked 4 sculptures along the trail, and I would like you to tell me a little bit more about them. Can you tell me now about the invitation?
You know, one of the greatest things in our life is hope. If you haven't got a feeling of hope, it is despair. I think that the Métis at Batoche certainly were familiar with it. They had come from the Fort Garry, a Assiniboine area, and they were familiar with what Louis Riel could accomplish. So they had a lot of respect for him because they knew they needed to deal with federal or territorial authorities. Louis Riel is highly educated, highly intelligent, so they decided they would go down to St. Peter's Mission, ask him if he would come north of the 49th parallel and help them. And he wasn't long in being very positive about it. Within 24 hours, they got a positive answer, and he started moving north up to the Batoche region. We're very close right here to a well-used Métis trail, a trade trail. And crisscrossing it, there's a Northwest Mounted Police patrol trail. But the most famous of those two trails was the Elbow Touchwood Trail. And it came virtually a mile south of here and crossed over to, not the town of Elbow. The Elbow got its name for that turn in the South Saskatchewan River. So that's where they ended up taking furs. And then it could be transported on water. But the carts became the freight liner of the prairies.
They sure did. I couldn't imagine, seeing 40 million buffalo roaming the plains here. Okay, so that leads me into the buffalo hunter. Can you tell me about that sculpture?
Buffalo or bison became very important to their way of life, not just for hunting, but for meat. And they tanned the hides. They became the covers for teepees.
So can you tell me the process behind creating your sculptures?
Well, first of all, I do a lot of reading. I do not start a sculpture just at random. I have to get as much information as I possibly can. Once I got started, I really got inside the object that I wanted to build. I became part of the sculpture. I really felt then I'd go back in the time period in which that particular object was a real person or an event, and my thoughts would be consumed by that era.
I could understand how you come close to the sculptures and they, how they become part of you. I can appreciate that and all the hours and time it goes into making one. Tell me about some of the challenges you faced in making the sculptures and how you overcame those challenges.
There is a reason I chose iron instead of marble. If I made a mistake, which I often did because I said I was an untrained artist, I could cut and reconfigure it.
What do you hope to leave as a legacy through your work?
Well, I hope there's better understanding. I hope that people as they travel are entertained by what has gone up there. Years ago, when people said it was a long, boring drive, there's lots of stories, and that was just one of them. And I hope that schools and the public will generally accept that as one of the prairie's great stories.
Once I found out who Don Wilkins was and the sculptures along the Louis Riel Trail, I became really intrigued that you were a non-Indigenous person that took such pride and workmanship in making the Métis sculptures along the trail. So, Don, you've made significant impacts here in Saskatchewan with our Métis people, in conjunction with your sculptures. So I would like to personally thank you for doing the sculptures. And, I hope the video that we shoot together gets played over and over and over. And one of the things that I hope is that my grandkids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, your great-great-grandkids get to see these stories. So once again, I'd like to thank you for inviting me into your home and sharing with me the story behind your sculptures.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So you told me about one of the sculptures, your masterpieces is close by. Let's take a ride in the Bronco and
okay.
You can tell me about it on the way over there.
Okay.
Fairly intricate, the fur on the buffalo. So how would you have bent all those by hand?
Yes. I put a strap of metal inside a pipe, but I leave that much sticking out on top. So then I put a wrench on that and start turning. And so each one are the same. I count the turns. So then I end up with a uniform piece, and I do all of them the same way.
Oh, okay. So they're all uniform. All those.
Yeah,
sayings
they
are
got
uniform?
per foot, they got the same number of twists.
And what year did you build that first Red River
Well,
cart?
I probably started ordering the material in 1997. And then I had to find out where I could get somebody to bend the outside rim on the wheels. I took measurements of an actual cart in the Western Development Museum in Moose Jaw, and then I decided for visual effect, like we're a long way from the highway, so I went 20% oversized to the original.
Oh, to make it more visible.
Yes.
Where did you decide where the sculptures would go in relation to the highway?
That's a good question. I didn't want to go through all this work and not have my work not noticed, because there was a purpose to it, because we were going to tell a story. So that had to be noticeable from the highway.
So I see there's a name on it. It says Spirit of the Plain. Can you tell me a little bit about Spirit of the Plain?
We talked earlier about how many millions of bison there were, how important it was to the people that were living here. And they actually used to thank Manitou for the bison that were on the plains. When the bison were taken out, it just decimated many native groups. They didn't have enough for clothing anymore. They could not cover the tent poles. It was devastating. By 1878, put near all the bison were gone out of Canada. A few stragglers were around, but not the great herds there were.
Well, Don, it has been a pleasure to spend the day with you. I would like to thank you again for allowing me to come into your home and to explore your contributions to Saskatchewan and highlighting our Métis people. I really appreciate that.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate your interest in your company. I've enjoyed every minute of our meeting this morning.
And I really hope that the people from not only Saskatchewan but around the world know who Don Wilkins is and the stories behind your sculptures.
Well, thank you very much. But what's important is the stories, not Don Wilkins.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it.